Welcome to the broadcast. Tonight, once again, a very exciting topic. Something that I have researched quite a bit in my career, something that I have been a part of as part of my career, and that is the culture of innovation. Interestingly enough, years ago, I was given a question, and the person that asked me the question, he was the chief naval officer at the time. And they were doing a program in Chapel Hill, and we were talking about innovation, and we were talking about all the great things that companies like Apple does, and some of the great things that had been done in military and throughout the world. We were talking about the great social innovations, the civil rights movement, um, the American Revolution, a lot of things that had happened, and sort of that innovative esprit de corps, if you want to think of it that way. But there was something that went on, and I was explaining to him some of the magic that I felt like I had experienced, not only working for companies, not only being a consultant or a researcher, but in my own life, the times when the extraordinary occurred, when the odds were against you, when the weather was not for you, when the wind was blowing against you, when everything seemed lost, and yet somehow you won. Somehow you were victorious. And all of us have those moments. Everybody. It's part of life. And to me, they're the sweetest moments when you defied the odds. And I think it's even a sweeter moment if you defied the odds with a group of people, when you were able to experience that with others. And you realize that, wow, we did it. We made it, whether it was to win the game that you were supposed to lose or somehow managed to pass the exam that you thought was not passable. But we all get that experience. We all get that feeling. And what is it about that magic? And so I had this conversation with the chief naval officer, and he said, I think that if I could ask anything out of someone that was teaching innovation to our leaders, it would be to explain that culture, to explain that feeling, to explain the magic. And I think that's why my favorite term for it, what is the magic of doing something impossible? And we've seen this in the past, the Wright brothers, two ordinary people from Dayton, Ohio, that invent something that had been mysterious and elusive to even the best scientists at the time. But they did it. They persevered. They somehow made it work. So what is the magic? And it was so funny to have that conversation because I drove home, I started thinking about that. I had been a part of some of that in my career, but I had been running so fast. I'd been moving on to the next project, or maybe writing the next research paper, or getting on a jet and flying to the next city, that I forgot to really think about what was the magic. And so it started me thinking about that. It started me thinking about the culture of innovation, or what is it in these organizations that make them routinely come up with good ideas. And so the idea started germinating in my head, and I started writing down experiences that I had, and I started calling people that I'd worked with, and I said, what is it about the organizations you've worked with, or the teams that you've played on? I talked to some professional athletes and some coaches in the NFL and in the NHL and the hockey leagues, and asked them, what was that like? What was it about? And it was really funny. A universal theme in it was an esprit de corps. It was a magic. It was being something more than a team. It was tribal. We were going after something big, and we knew it, and it became very tribal. It became very, very different. And another theme that came out of it was we weren't necessarily the most talented, but we had the magic. I had a couple of NHL hockey coaches talk about that we didn't think we were the most talented team. We didn't have the most superstars, but for a moment in time, we were tribal. It's really interesting. One of the interviews that I did was with the St. Louis Blues uh, NHL hockey team, won the Stanley Cup. And I asked them about that. And that's what they said. We, for a moment, for a certain period of time, we were a little bit more than a team. It was something more about it. Interviewed a couple of the players from the 1980 United U.S. Hockey team that unexpectedly won the gold medal, and it was the same story. There was something more. Talking to people at Apple, talking to people um, all over the world about innovative projects, and asking them what it was like. And so what happened is I eventually settled on a group of organizations, a group of initiatives that were extraordinary. And that's where I began to define what it is. What is the magic? What is that tribal feeling? What is that esprit de corps? And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight, because as a leader, as someone who someday may be asked or has already been asked to lead an initiative, we have to ask ourselves, how can we create a predisposition? How can we create a feeling? How can we create an atmosphere or a culture where we're going to do something more than ordinary? Something a little bit more than what is expected. How can we be excellent? How can we be extraordinary? And that's what tonight is about. I'm going to have some examples for you. I'm going to talk about some different projects, take you inside of them, and show you what it means to do incredible things, to have that kind of innovative magic. So let's go into the visuals now and take a look at this extraordinary idea, this extraordinary way of performing at extraordinary levels. So if you think about the idea of culture, I thought about it, calling it esprit de corps. I thought about calling it culture, but that's not what was being explained to me. It wasn't anything that resonated. The word that kept coming up, and I'll say this, the word that I think of in the extraordinary endeavors that I've been involved in, it's very tribal, because tribal makes it personal to you. And it sort of highlights that connectedness that you have with other people. And it's not exclusive at all. Basically, some of the best organizations in the world are tribes that coordinate and collaborate with each other. But to be tribal is to belong, is to have a role, is to have a responsibility, and it is to be personally invested in the outcome of everyone else in the tribe, that we work together. And I think that's why I settled on it. That's why I call this tribal spirit or tribal innovation. And for a little shameless self-promotion, I did capture all of this in a book. Not only what's going on today, not only today's initiatives, the book goes into historical initiatives, things from the past that were extraordinary, extraordinary people that had this tribal mindset. So what you're about to see here is an overview and some examples taken from the book, Ideas in Innovative Organizations. So let's take a look. The organizations that I chose, some of them I'm just going to signal out to you were what we call in the academic world a convenience sample. They were companies that I'd worked with. There were connections that I had, but they were also organizations that were highly recommended by other people that I knew in industries that said, you need to see what they're doing. You need to take a look at these organizations and you need to see what they're doing. And we talked about some of these in prior conversations and prior broadcasts, but here they are. These were the organizations that were studied for the book: Berkeley Lab, Event Horizon Telescope, New Horizons, DARPA. Every one of these organizations has accomplished incredible things. DARPA basically were the founding fathers of the internet as we know it. New Horizons, the exploration of Pluto and those planetary systems. We're going to see more from Event Horizon Telescope coming up, but basically photographing a black hole. Berkeley Labs, areas of everything from robotics. What's really interesting about Berkeley is their concept of team science, interdisciplinary, very diverse approaches to solving very complex problems. Open AI pioneering the field of artificial intelligence, Walt Disney Imagineering, creating experiences, creating characters, creating contexts that unleash your imagination. The Robotic Research Initiative of South Korea, micro robots, nanotechnology, the American Red Cross, responding to disasters in the blink of an eye. They don't know what's coming. Hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, even pandemic, but they respond and they respond well. The Mayo Clinic pioneering new research in medicine, along with CDC and certainly the Broad Institute, creating just revolutions in medicine, DNA, gene editing. One of my favorites, the Sesame Workshop. We're going to see some examples in just a moment. But what an incredibly innovative organization. What an amazing group of people to rethink children's programming. Just an amazing set of ideas, an amazing way of working. Now, what's interesting about all of these organizations is that there is a definable culture. There is a definable tribal mindset, a tribal spirit, as I call it, and it exists in every one of them. Every one of these organizations does the extraordinary. And when you visit them and when you talk to them, and in many of these, I've worked within these organizations, it's done without a lot of disruption. They routinely come up with good ideas. Innovation is part of what they do every day. They don't view it as an exception to their organizational processes or their organizational life. It's the rule. And I think that's really amazing when you think about what they're able to accomplish. So let's take a deeper look. Let's go in and try to understand what this tribal perspective is. And here it is. Basically, it's 7 different things, yet they're all interconnected, that really define these 7 distinct things that you'll see in every one of these organizations. And we're going to go through each one tonight with some examples, and I think you'll be amazed. Number 1, ambition. You got to think bigger. You got to have a vision quest. We tend to think small. We tend to take big challenges and make them small challenges. Ambition is it is a motivational force in an organization. People in an organization can feel ambition, and they can also sense when there is no ambition. Every one of these initiatives, every one of these organizations certainly rates very high on thinking bigger about problems. Emergent structure. These are emergent processes based on values, beliefs, and codes of conduct. There's formal structure in an organization, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with reporting to a certain boss and being responsible for people. These are all well and good, but what's interesting is there's an emergent structure. There are unwritten codes. There are unwritten ways of doing things that these teams adopt that is amazingly effective. It sets them apart. They have a way of working, a set of codes that are absolutely productive, absolutely strong in creating innovation. Roles and responsibilities. In every one of the organizations, you will see clear roles. And those roles really amplify the talents of the people that hold them. You're never given a role where your talents aren't leveraged or your know-how is not leveraged. Now, it doesn't mean that you have a role in an organization and you can't take on other roles, but certainly everyone leverages their know-how and talent, and people are more productive. You feel like you belong when you have a role and a responsibility. Now, contrast that with an organization where you're not quite sure what your role is. You're not quite sure what your responsibility is. You can see the wasted effort, the inefficiency, and more importantly, the loss of connectedness. You don't feel vested in the organization. And I'll have to say, many times in organizations, this is a big problem. People don't feel connected because they don't understand their role and responsibility. An initiative comes out, and yet you don't understand the role that you're supposed to play or that you might play. You certainly could become threatened. At the very least, you feel that you're not part of the of what's unfolding. And that really creates a lot of problems in an organization. So roles and responsibilities are something you see very clearly in these organizations. Trust. Trust is really important. Trust means we share resources, we share knowledge, and we share the credit. That's an amazing aspect of these organizations. Certainly, having worked in some of these organizations and being someone who's visited them and interviewed them for research purposes, the trust just really jumps to the forefront. Everybody has everybody else's back. Everybody is sharing what they know, and it is seen as desirable that everyone shares in the rewards. Trust cannot be under talked about or underestimated in these organizations. It is really important. Navigation. This might be what I call the control factor or the rational factor, or sometimes I call it the parental force in an innovative organization. It's analytics, calculations, experiences. It's the guide in the quest. Again, the parental force. We use numbers, we use facts. We don't move on hearsay. We don't share hearsay or speculation. We move on the facts. Now, this is one where I can say, in the experiences that I've had with very innovative organizations, from Apple all the way through to Disney, Pixar, even in the work that I've done in DARPA, is the role of facts and the role of data and data gathering. It's really important. I think that sometimes I disappoint uh, executives and students when I say that a lot of the decision making is driven by facts rather than feeling. It just never was. I mean, it's a great story, and I certainly love the idea of a messiah figure in an organization that just conjures up the future. But I never saw it. I've never seen it yet in an innovative organization. Decisions, framing a challenge, trying to understand what we should do is all driven by analytics, calculation, experiences. All of these things are important. It's very tribal. Now, again, if you start to marry these dimensions back to tribes of old, you see them there too. If you look back on the Apollo 13 program, if you look back on the civil rights movement, if you look back on a lot of great initiatives throughout our history in the world, you will see these things. They're present. They're obvious. And it's amazing to see that it's carried on in the amazing projects of today. Perseverance. This is the one that is never talked about by motivational speakers. It is the one that is avoided, I think, in MBA classrooms. It is the topic that is never talked about because it's unpleasant. You got to have perseverance. You got to have persistence. You got to have patience, and you got to have endurance. One of the things that you will see in any innovative endeavor is that there will be trouble. There will be setbacks. You can count on it. There are going to be problems that might seem insurmountable. Good organizations, tribal organizations, are able to persevere. They get by. And I think that's what really separates some of the innovative organizations from the less innovative organizations. At the first sign of trouble, an organization without perseverance will simplify challenges, avoid them, try to find ways so that they don't have to persevere, they don't have to endure. And I think it's a big mistake. And I think from a leadership perspective, you almost have to prepare people uh, for for perseverance. We're going to have setbacks. We're going to have challenges, and that's why we're here. That's what we hope for. In the book, I make a statement, and when I wrote it, it's one of those things as a writer, you write it and you think, I hope people understand it. I hope I capture the idea. Innovative organizations actually thirst. They welcome. They thirst for and they welcome challenging situations. They love to persevere. They love it. It's an amazing thing, but they hunger for it and they get by it. So perseverance is one of those things that every innovative organization must have. Sacrifice, another one that people don't like to talk about. Uh, Consulting firms like to avoid it, and motivational speakers will never talk about it. You got to place the interest of the tribe first. That means sacrificing some of your fame, sacrificing some of your talent sometimes, sacrificing your time. It's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. You know, it's interesting. If you think about uh, getting a graduate degree, if you think about, studying something that is difficult, it involves sacrifice. And many times that's where it breaks down for people. You're not willing to make the sacrifice. It's interesting. I've for a long time played musical instruments, and one of the ones that I was encouraged to learn because my father was a guitar player was banjo, because he wanted a son that played banjo in his band, and so I learned how to play that, and I learned how to play it well. And uh, there are many times I'm asked by people like, "Wow, you sound great. I would love to learn to play the banjo. I'm going to do that." And I want to tell them, think about it very deeply. You'll sacrifice a lot of time. You're going to sacrifice your fingernails. You're going to sacrifice the ends of your fingertips because they're going to be so worn out. It takes a lot of sacrifice. You got to be willing to pay the price to be innovative as well. And it's very tribal to be able to sacrifice. If you're not willing to sacrifice, it doesn't mean that you can't accomplish something. It just won't be extraordinary. In fact, let's just say that about all 7 things. Yes, it is possible to do something, but it won't be something extraordinary. It won't be something really memorable. So I think the thing that you have to remember here is, as a leader, assess your organization across these 7 dimensions, particularly if the challenge ahead is big. If it's something that might really tax the organization, and ask yourself, how do we measure up across these 7 dimensions? How are we doing? And if the answer is that we don't measure up well, we don't have some of these components, we don't have tribal spirit. If that's the answer, then don't attempt the extraordinary project. Stay with the simple stuff. You want to make sure that you're able to do this and able to do it effectively. So let's go into each one and take a look at what they are, and also take a look at some of the organizations. And I've just only chosen a few that really demonstrate this. The first one that I want to talk about is certainly ambition. Ambition is one of those things that I think is it's a great concept. but it can be very, very difficult to achieve. Uh, Not only is it organizational, it's individual. So what I did here is I listed three big boxes, and that's what I put into the book. Vision, how we solve problems, how we use information, seeing a bigger picture. This is how it applies to you and me. So let's think about ourselves rather than an organization. Engagement, how you participate, your level of empathy, diversity, responsiveness. That's a big part of ambition for you as a leader, and the approach, the tools that we use, unorthodox approaches, networks, experimentation, risk management. One of the things that we can do here is we can start to gauge how good are we individually at these seven things, not just the organization, but how good are we as leaders, and sharpen up our skills and sharpen up our profile in terms of these seven dimensions. Now, what I've listed here in the middle are lessons learned along the way. So these were things that I had experienced in my journey to become more ambitious. And by the way, we're not really designed to be ambitious. To be quite honest with you, the human condition, sadly, is one to be unambitious, to think smaller, to frame problems in a smaller way. So every morning, believe it or not, I try to remind myself, think a little bigger. Because I know that overnight I've forgotten it. And during the day, sometimes I have to give myself a midday reminder to think a little bigger, think a little bit more ambitiously than I am programmed to think. And so that's the first thing that I list there. Think bigger. Also, avoid localizing a problem. We tend to get set in our ways, and we localize problems within our context, our challenges. When you're thinking bigger and you're thinking about solutions, we have to think beyond our organization, think beyond our education, think beyond our experiences. It's so easy to localize things within our own toolkits. You want to avoid that if you can. Chase big ideas. Here is a pearl of wisdom. Good ideas don't want to be found. They don't. They camouflage themselves. They hide from you. Now, bad ideas, they will be right out there in the open for you to see. Easy solutions will be so easy to see. The good ideas, the more complex things, they're a little harder to find. I have yet to see a project, I've yet to be a part of a project where the good idea was obvious. From the Apple iPod to the iPhone, all the way to current solutions to address a pandemic, the big ideas are hard to find. And it's frustrating. Believe me, it's frustrating, particularly in a public health crisis. We want to think about quick solutions. We want to think about getting this out of the way. And yet, the big idea is avoiding us. It is hiding from us, and we have to chase it. That's a part of the innovation solution, or part of being very ambitious, is to be able to endure, to be able to understand that big ideas don't want to be found. Be conspicuously present. You got to walk around. Not to overuse the term, but ambition certainly is a contact sport. If you show up, if you're asking questions, then those around you sense that it's important. If you're not present, if you don't ask questions, if you don't attend the meeting, if you invite a speaker and that speaker begins his or her talk and you leave the room, you just told everybody that it's not important. It's not important. This happened to me one time. I was brought into one of the services that I will leave anonymous, and the commanding officer said, "We've brought Dr. Segars in. He's going to talk to us about innovation. It's important, and he's got a message that we all need to hear. Dr. Segars, you have the floor." I took the floor, and he left the room. And I thought to myself, nothing I say really matters. He just killed it for me. It's nothing's going to be matter. No one's going to listen, because the signal was is that well, it's important enough for you to stay here and listen to him, but not important enough for me to stay here. The little things you do matter. They send signals, and people pick up on those. So you have to walk around. You got to ask questions. You got to seek alternative views. They won't come to you. Interestingly enough, I always hear someone say, you got an open door. You hear leaders say, I've got an open door. I've got an open door policy. Oh my gosh, I really hate to hear that when it's said, because what the leader is telling you is that, okay, you come to me with your view. It never happens. You got to go out there and seek alternative views. Go out there and talk to the people that might be a little disgruntled, that might not be happy with the way things are going, and try to see it from their perspective. It's not easy to do. You got to improvise. You got to practice initiative. Improvisation is a skill, a trait that I think has been given to the creative arts, but it is so important in business. It's so important in running an organization to be able to improvise, to be able to pivot, to be able to do that, and to pivot strategically, knowing you're going in the right direction. As an NHL coach told me one time, in hockey, it's important to know when to call that time out. It's important to know that the shift strategy that you had for the hockey game isn't working. And when the opportunity presents itself to change those shifts or to change the lineups, it's important to be able to do that. It's a constant game of strategy. So you have to be able to do that. Embrace the unorthodox. That's tough to do. We get into modes of planning. We get into ways of spending money, and we don't think about the unorthodox, particularly if the unorthodox works. That's a shock to an organization. It's a shock to a leader. But sometimes you have to embrace it and say, wait a minute, this is an unorthodox approach. This is different for us, but it works. It's something we should consider. That's part of ambition. If you can't consider the unorthodox, your ambition bubble just got smaller. You're not as ambitious. Be able to experiment. You've got to be able to test some things. You've got to be able to launch some experiments to try to understand what's going on around you and to understand what might work and, more importantly, what does not work. And, of course, you have to empower those around you. I think one of the greatest tests of ambition is trusting others to lead initiatives, to render an opinion, to make a decision. It's very difficult to empower, but it's a big part of ambition. Well, when you think about ambition, one of the projects that comes to mind for me, and one that I wrote very extensively about in the book and talk about, is Sesame Workshop. This is a great initiative. Sesame Street was a product of the Children's Television Workshop. It was so revolutionary they couldn't carry it on regular TV channels, but public TV invested in it. Public television gave it its home and gave it the room to innovate. And what happened was a lesson in ambition. It revolutionized children's education, and it is probably the one television show that's had an impact on the greatest number of people globally, not just in the United States. So let's take a look at the magic sauce, the tribal instinct, the esprit de corps of the Children's Television Workshop.
So let's close out tonight with a little Muppet talk. Next month marks the 50th anniversary of Sesame Street's debut, now a landmark in children's television. Beyond all the fun and humor and songs, the show has been doing serious work to reach out to families in need. That's probably not widely known by many people. Its latest effort, a new initiative with its well-known characters to help families deal with addiction, including alcoholism, drugs, and opioids. Hari Srinivasan looks at that work and how it fits into the program's growing legacy. It's part of our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
Sally, you've never seen a street like Sesame Street. Everything happens here. You're gonna love it.
Ever since Big Bird and his friends took their first steps onto their neighborhood full of Harlem brownstones and into public television households, the program's creators have always had a few goals in mind for its young audience.
E is for Bert. C is for Cookie Monster.
It all seems as simple as ABC today, but back then, its secret sauce was unprecedented for children's television. It provided children with a mix of early childhood education, social and emotional learning, all with a sense of humor, music, and hundreds of guest stars to keep parents engaged as well.
Oh, why wonder?
At the same time, the creators wove diversity into the show's DNA at a time when that was not common in TV. Over its more than 4,500 episodes, 35 TV specials, and the 1,000-plus fuzzy characters it introduced, the show's reach is enormous. Tens of millions of adults and their children have watched in more than 150 countries. New episodes air first on HBO and then on PBS, and more than 5 million subscribe to its YouTube channel.
We are experts on helping a child arrive at school ready to learn.
Sherry Weston is the president of Global Impact and Philanthropy for Sesame Workshop, the company behind Sesame Street.
A 50-year history of reaching children in those critical early years when you can make the most difference and have them arrive at school ready to learn and ready to thrive.
Sesame Street teaches those social and emotional skills in part by being inclusive and showcasing it.
There's nothing else that can compare with my hair.
It was the first children's show to prominently feature actors of color. In 1971, it cast Sonia Manzano as Maria in the first Latina leading role in TV history.
Do you, Maria, take Luis to be your husband?
I do.
That goal of inclusion and diversity has expanded over the past 15 years. Sesame Workshop's Communities Initiative now reaches specific audiences who are facing major challenges. That can mean distinctive videos for children of parents who are incarcerated, or families with children who have special needs, or live in foster care, or are homeless. Sesame Workshop has done this internationally as well, creating early childhood programs for children of refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Bangladesh. Though the Communities program has grown, there's still a big focus with one of the original targeted groups, military families.
It started actually 13 years ago with our Military Family Initiative when we realized how many young children had parents who were being deployed, and often multiple deployments, and realized there were no tools for those parents and no resources for those young children to help understand it.
Sesame creates videos, apps, and books with messages aimed at these families about how to help them cope with the realities of their experiences. They're available online to all, but they're crafted to show parents how they can talk to children about these challenges. Elmo and Rosita help me understand.
Elmo, do you know a lot of kids that have military families?
Yeah, Elmo's been really lucky because Elmo's gotten to meet a lot of kids who have mommies and daddies in the military. Yeah. And you know what? Elmo learned that military kids are actually a lot like Elmo, but sometimes they have to go through big changes too.
Fouché and Felicia Miller were one of several sets of parents we caught up with at a special Sesame event for military families. When Fouché, a staff sergeant in the Army, is away, the family connects over video chat, but that's not always an option.
What's hard for you to communicate to them?
Well, when I'm out on deployments, the hardest part is basically sometimes we don't have internet service, or we're out on missions for days without being able to communicate back home.
How do you deal with missing your kids?
For the most part, I try to block it out, which you can't.
Abraham and Nicole Blocker face similar challenges, but because Abraham is a Marine Corps reservist, they face even more difficulties connecting to a larger community.
And so a lot of people where we live they don't know, we're the only military people that they know. And so we don't have that community, even though people are very eager to help, we don't have that.
I think the challenge is that just the sadness that comes with it, and trying to and turn that into a positive, that to not dwell on that, but to own it and know that it is something sad that Daddy's going to be away. He's really going to miss them.
Parents told us the programs helped their children better understand what was happening and gave tools they used to reassure their kids.
So we recently watched Elmo's dad gets deployed, and this one kind of understands when Daddy leaves and goes to work, he's helping other people.
The Military Families Initiative goes beyond deployment. It has expanded to include material about dealing with grief when a loved one doesn't come home, and caregiving for a loved one who comes home with injuries. Sherry Weston says the programs can be watched by all families to increase their empathy, but they're written to help kids and parents directly affected.
He's not here? Well, what do you mean?
Mika, you know how Papi has days when he feels okay?
See?
He also has days where he doesn't feel like himself. And some of his days are a little rough and stormy.
Weston says work like this is a natural outgrowth of what the show always did. Like in 1982, when Big Bird and millions of children learned about the death of longtime character Mr. Hooper.
Well, he's gonna come back. Why, who's gonna take care of the store? And who's gonna make my birds eat milkshakes and tell me stories?
Big Bird, I'm gonna take care of the store. Mr. Hooper, he left it to me. And I'll make you your milkshakes, and we'll all tell you stories, and we'll make sure you're okay.
In the past couple of years, the show gained recognition for its introduction of a Muppet on the autism spectrum, Julia.
May I see your painting, Julia? Julia?
Sometimes it takes Julia a while to answer. It helps to ask again. Julia, can Big Bird see your painting?
See your painting? Yes.
And so I think Julia has been amazing because, again, she's helping children with autism have a child they can relate to and feel less alone. But she's also teaching others why Julia may not look you in the eye.
Some of that praise turned into tough criticism over the summer when a different group, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, broke off its work with Sesame Street. The group criticized an advertising campaign which it says promotes screening for autism. It says that stigmatizes and treats autistic people as burdens on their families. For its part, the Sesame Workshop says the campaign was developed in close consultation with more than 250 organizations and experts across the autism community. It also says it will celebrate the uniqueness of every child, as well as what all children have in common. More than any criticism, the show has weathered a big change in a fractured TV landscape, and at one point a financial deficit that led many to wonder whether it could stay afloat. Sesame Workshop just signed a 5-year deal with HBO for new episodes to air first on its upcoming streaming app. They'll then be available for free on PBS. In the meantime, the hugs are free too, for kids and parents, if you can get one. For the PBS NewsHour, this is Hari Srinivasan, hanging out under sunny skies with a few furry friends on the friendliest block in New York.
Wow. What a great story. What a great initiative. And the thing that I want you to really understand there and to really grasp is the big ideas, the ambition around Sesame Street, and the idea of what children's programming can be. Certainly something more than what I as a child saw on Saturday morning cartoons. Nothing wrong with those, but doing a little bit more. It's just great to see an initiative like that. And again, it's very tribal. It's very different. The second aspect behind ambition is emergent structure. Again, this is the emergence of a social structure of beliefs, of attitudes, of behavior, codes of conduct that aren't governed by rule or law, if you want to think about that. They're actually part of what the teams or the organizations or the tribe develops for themselves. And here you can see some aspects of that. Consensus building. One of the things that's really interesting about consensus, it's not voting, it's conversation. It's being able to illustrate what consensus is. And in the book, I talk about this quite a bit, that typically organizations mistake a raw vote for consensus, or they convene a group of leaders and all the leaders agree and they call it consensus. What you really want is more of an illustrative form, and you can see that in the top picture. Perhaps you have someone put green dots if they think it's a great idea, orange dots if it's a average idea, or maybe a red dot if there might be trouble on the different ideas, and then you discuss that. But what you try to do is set up systems where you get consensus. What you're trying to do is capture the talent, the expertise, the knowledge within the organization. You got to make the most of the knowledge you have. And speaking of making the most of what you've got, you got to have resources. And resources are not cheap, they're expensive. One of the things that I saw in a lot of these organizations is they protect and they use resources very, very wisely. There is very little waste. And it doesn't mean that they're cheap. It just means they're very, very resourceful. They make the most of what they've got. Loyalty is really important. You got to build commitment. You got to have people that are vested in the mission. Now, going back to Sesame Street, it's easy to see that there are a whole group of cameramen, of puppeteers, writers, actors that are heavily committed to the mission of what Sesame Street is because of that ambition. So again, loyalty does meet up with ambition. People tend to be more loyal to initiatives that they really believe in and think are going to make a difference. Storytelling is a huge part of this. It's really kind of in tandem with analytics and data. It's one thing to gather numbers. It's another thing to tell the story behind the numbers. And one of the things you see in these organizations, a part of emergent structure, was not just sending spreadsheets, but having conversations and telling stories about how things were done, about what was important. Ceremony is absolutely important. Ceremony really brings people together. It celebrates. One of the interesting things that I was told about ceremony, and again, this was by an NHL hockey coach, is that it was important to bring the spouses, the mothers, the fathers, the significant others of hockey players into the organization to celebrate, because if people who influenced their players had a negative opinion of the team or the organization, it was going to impact those players. So celebration and ceremony really went beyond just members of the organization. It extended into the families and the influencers of those organizational members so that they became vested in the organization. And human touch. Human touch really means conversations. It means proximity. It means sharing, not only in formal meetings, but together as a team in informal conversations. It is an amazing thing to see what human touch brings to an organization in a world of emails, in a world of texting, and of course now in a world where you've got the scare of pandemic. Human touch can be hard to accomplish, but there are ways to do that. There are ways to bring people together and to bring ideas together and to make people feel connected. And that's a big part of emergent structure and a big part of human touch. Another important aspect of this really gets into roles and responsibilities. Now, again, what I wanted to do here is just show you some roles that I have seen, some roles that I have played. In fact, I will tell you in most projects that I've worked on with Apple and even in DARPA and even in Pixar as well, I'm typically the wizard. And I think it has to do with the gray hair and the beard, maybe. But no, I think it has to do with my abilities as a scientist. Here are some of the roles that I've seen. The oracle or the architect, someone that provides leadership, vision, coaching, and direction. A seeker, this is really important. What a seeker does is they roam among members of other teams. You give and receive information. It's important to have a role, to have somebody that is not only part of your team, but they are actually going out there and boundary spanning to other teams, to learn from them and to bring that knowledge back to your home team. That's the role that I've always wanted when I've worked in some of these organizations, but I never get it. There's always someone that's a little bit more talented and someone who's better at doing that than I am. I think that I might get into a team that I get interested in and might not forget to roam to the other teams or forget to go back to my home team. But it's really important because that's knowledge flow. That's someone who's bringing knowledge back to the team. The wizard, the fact checker, that's typically my role. Research, data, scientific experiments. I don't mind it. It's good. But you have to have someone who's a fact checker in a team. Now, again, one of the things I want to say as we get through these roles is that if these aren't assigned in a team, they won't happen. So one of the leadership challenges is to make sure that we understand what roles are going to be important for the project that we're about to take on, and to assign people that have talent or that needed talent to those roles. That's really important that happens. So we want to make sure that we match talent to roles, that the roles are assigned. Now, one of the other things I'll say, since we're kind of midway through here in the role list, is that it doesn't mean you have to stay within that role all the time. This is just your dominant role. You're responsible for it. That's the important point here, is that you are responsible for the role. The facilitator, there is always someone who is talented at refereeing discussion, someone who reasons. I've known many people throughout my career who are the best facilitators. Someone has to have that role in a team. Flamekeeper, the fixer, keeps track of time, finds resources, schedules, problem solves. There's always someone who is absolutely great at that. I am terrible at it, but if someone on the team is good at it, then they're fulfilling that role for people like me that have trouble keeping track of time. The artist is one of the most important roles. You transfer ideas to art, create visuals, charts, and illustrations. What's really interesting about the artist role is that over time, they will really develop a deep understanding of the challenges that the team is facing and the solutions that the team is coming up with, simply because they're turning those ideas into art. So the artist is really important. And of course, getting good visual representations are key. So I would call the artist one of the most important roles in any team. And there are people who are wonderful at that. The author and the historian translate ideas into words and then words into documents. This is important. There are great wordsmiths out there. There are people who can capture a conversation in a few sentences effectively. We want to have them doing that on the team. And the genius. The genius is an expert in critical subject matter. Many times that might be someone outside the organization. It might be someone who gives expertise about something. Perhaps we're developing something in the medical field and the outside genius might be a group of cardiologists or a group of oncologists that direct us and give us some expertise. Now, a very, very important aspect of this that can't be emphasized enough. In many organizations, all of these roles are bundled into the role of the leader. The leader does all of these. That never happens in an innovative organization. It never happens in an initiative where something remarkable happens. These things are unbundled. They're unbundled. And everybody has a role. Interestingly enough, I did a interview for the book with the great coach of the New England Patriots, Bill Belichick, and very, very interesting perspective on success in coaching football. And it was on roles. He felt like it was really important that everyone on the team understood their roles, that you know exactly what you're responsible for, you know how to prepare for that role, and you know what your responsibility is as the game unfolds. and that responsibility is taken on, valued, and accomplished. And it was a really interesting perspective on it. So it goes for organizations, that we have to understand roles. We have to understand what it means to be successful, and we have to understand our role in achieving that success. Well, speaking of roles, responsibilities, characters, let's hear from a really incredible organization, and from a perspective of what roles and responsibilities are to that organization. And I'm talking about Pixar. Pixar is one of these organizations that seems to do the impossible, to create animation like Toy Story, to create the technology that created Toy Story, was a remarkable thing. In visiting this organization and working with this organization, one of the things that you see clearly is roles, responsibilities, emergent structure, and also ambition. So let's get a look behind the scenes at the Pixar way of innovating.
Talk to us about what the Brain Trust is. This is something you started at Pixar and that now exists at Disney Animation as well. Can you explain it?
Yes, and the truth is we came upon it accidentally because our first 5 people were pretty phenomenal. And so we took the principle of how these guys work together and we applied it to other groups, and it didn't work. So then we had to go back and figure out, okay, what is it about this group that was working that didn't work with other groups? Mm-hmm. And from that, we came up with some principles which we do apply, and this is what we took down to Disney. Now, when we talk about the Brain Trust, it's not a group of people that exists all the time. Mm-hmm. It's what we call the group that come together to solve a problem, usually for meetings after we viewed what a film is, or a 2-day offsite. And it operates under 4 principles. One of them is that nobody can override the director. Mm-hmm. All right, so basically we remove the power structure from the room. So John's notes or my notes, we can't override the director. Mm-hmm. Now, it's easier said than done because people will sometimes defer to what they perceive the power structure to be. But it's a conscious effort to not have that. The second is it's peer-to-peer. So that it's filmmaker talking to filmmaker. It's not boss talking to filmmaker, boss talking to employee. Mm-hmm. The third one...
But you can't override the director.
Well, it's because the director it's their project. It's his or her project. All right, they're the ones who are responsible. The reason we have to remove the power structure is if they know the group can override them, mm-hmm. then they will enter the room in a defensive posture. And that will make it so they don't listen. By allowing them to say, no, the choice is really yours, they then can come in, because they're highly exposed, mm-hmm. and then they can listen. And they will treat the comments as comments to help them. Mm-hmm. The third principle is that they all share in each other's success. They have a vested interest in each other's success. And the last one is just that they give and take honest notes. And so those are principles. Now, we don't always live up to them, because it's hard to do.
Which is the hardest one?
I would probably say the power structure one. But there are consequences of that. What it does is you kind of pull back from the honest notes. Now, we usually do live up to them. That's why the films are pretty good. Every once in a while, they're just flaming disasters. We have to reconvene with a smaller group because those things get in the way. They're subconscious things people can't help themselves. Every once in a while, magic happens. And by magic, what I mean is there's the loss of the ego in the room. And what you see are ideas going out. It doesn't matter whether they're bad or good. Nobody's clinging to them. They're just focused on the problem. And almost every film has one of those times, usually a 2-day offsite, when the magic takes place. And you can't, because we don't record them, Right. All you can do is say, oh, it's an amazing event when it happens.
Can you give an example of a particular movie where the brain trust really kind of forced a director to completely change their mind or influence them to change their mind on something pretty major?
Yeah, well, again, as you pull back, it's not force, but the influence is there. This is when the magic happens. So Frozen is an example of that. So Frozen actually is a project that's been around Disney for many, many, many years. And then somebody came in with an idea with it, and it wasn't quite gelling. So the issue is you have this queen, was she a bad queen? Initially, she had an army of bad snowmen.
Oh, Olaf is much better. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So there were all sorts of problems, and so how bad was this queen? And you know, and it was a sister story, but it wasn't working. So we had an offsite when all of a sudden everything clicked, and there was just this realization about what it was really about, and the whole thing turned on itself when you walked out saying, okay, now we've got a movie, now we can see it. And until that point, we didn't have it. And if you don't have those points, that's when you sometimes have a restart, because you never know if you're going to find that point, in which case you say, okay, I give up, I have to restart.
So you can see here, again, the role of emergent structure and the role of roles. Very, very important in Pixar's process. And it's really interesting when you hear that discussion and really get into this idea of how he talks about eliminating the power structure. What he's talking about there is, again, trying to unpack what is usually packed in the leader's role and distribute that out to the teams. And that is done through roles and responsibilities. He calls it the brain trust. It's a part of the process. The two things important there are emergent structure and roles and responsibilities. Well, moving on through and thinking about the other aspects of tribalness, certainly one of those things is trust. There has to be a lot of trust within an organization, and trust between the organization and other organizations, trust between groups of people in organization and groups of people within the organizations. So if you take a look at the dimensions of trust, certainly within an organization, it's credibility. You have to be an accurate interpreter of events. This for many organizations can be very, very tough. Organizationally, you always want to interpret with accuracy. Many times in my career, I've gotten the email that so-and-so has stepped down from their role of, this title, and they are going to return to their first love, which is research. We want to thank them for their contributions to the organization, and on and on and on. When everybody in the organization knows that the person was asked to step down, that they had done the best they could in that role and that responsibility, but they were actually not very good, and you just lose trust in the organization. You know that the organization doesn't value your level of intelligence because they're telling you something that you know is just blatantly untrue. Now, I'm not advocating senior leaders go out and write emails that hurt people's feelings or say the wrong things, but at least don't interpret it in a way that most of the organization knows is false. And the same between groups. You have to have credible communication. Efficacy, you have to be in control of events. That's a part of trust. The worst thing that can happen in an organization and between organizations and people is that someone believes that the organization or a group of people are not in control of events. It's out of our hands. We don't know what's going on. Who knows what will happen next? That breaks down trust in an incredibly fast way. Commitment, and again, this is sort of my harping on honorable profit. You're out to do the greater good. You're out to really help. That builds trust rather than we're out to make the next quarter's numbers. We're out to impress this investment firm. We're out to change the world. We're out to make the world a better place. That really builds commitment Resolve is determination to act. If something needs to be done, we will do it. We have the resolve to make decisions tough and decisions that aren't so tough, but we will act. An organization that has no resolve, has no set of decisions going forward, has no will to act, you lose the trust. You lose people. You're not gaining that loyalty. That's so important. Consistency. You have to be logical and you have to be consistent in decision making. Really, it's equity. That builds trust. You can't give some people raises, some people don't get raises. You can't give some people time off for working in the community and others not. You have to be consistent. And this is a leadership challenge. Sometimes it's tough to maintain that consistency, but it's absolutely necessary. The final one is accountability. You have to be accountable for the decisions you make. You have to own up to it. This is all tough. Now, all of these things are easy to do when things are going well. Where organizations fall down on this and where they become less tribal is in a crisis. Something goes wrong. Some news reporting doesn't paint us in a favorable way. Social media is beginning to trash us. It's easy to fall down on all of these 6 dimensions, to not report events accurately, to not own up and have accountability, to not have a set of decisions going forward to correct the problem, to not believe that you're in control of events. It's very, very tough. So this builds trust. Now we can use this as individuals, as leaders, and think about it. And we can also try to find it in our organizations when we're crafting a response to crises or bad events. We can go through this list of 6 things, and we know that if we can check off each of these in a positive way, we're going to build trust in the organization. And between people, of course, it's the usual things, but there are important things: to be reliable. You can count on me. To be honest, to be sensible, to be frugal, to be incorruptible, humble, and faithful. These are all the things that build trust. And again, as you see in the photographs there, everything from Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, Dr. Goodall, Henson's Muffets to Mr. Rogers, you saw all of those things. And certainly in the organizations that I've studied, you see this all the way through the organization. So trust is incredibly important. And of course, navigation. You can't say enough about this. Numbers, knowledge, and their interpretation. Numbers are one thing, but notice they're in this wheel that spins all the time. Data, information, analytics. Knowledge has to interact with that. Know-how, experience, foresight. And I think the key one there is experience. These organizations, the innovative ones, absolutely use experience. They leverage it in an incredible way. And I think the third piece there may be the most important: interpretation. When you combine all of these 3 things together, the data, the knowledge, the ability to interpret, you have critical thinking. You have ambition. You have a predisposition to do something really extraordinary. It's hard to say enough about navigation. It is so very important. Perseverance, we talked about that a little bit, but it is so important as well. Persistence, patience, endurance. The greatest adventures of all time, exploration of the South Pole, moon landings, were all done with great perseverance. You've got to be persistent. You've got to have a course of action, and you've got to know that there will be difficulties, and you've got to have persistence. You got to have patience, and that's a tough one. It's so hard to have patience. Things go wrong. The tide turns against you. the wind blows against you and we can lose our patience. I think that patience is one of the greatest managerial tools out there. It's one of the greatest leadership traits out there, is to have patience, to know that things will go wrong, to know that even if a team member, a subordinate, did not perform well at some point, to have patience and know that they may perform better the next time. You have to have that patience. It's tough. And of course, endurance. Difficult things are hard. You have to be able to endure. Again, if you take a look at some of the examples here, Fred Smith's FedEx company, the legend goes that he received a bad grade on the business case for that idea. I have visited Fred Smith's office and I have seen the paper. He has it framed. It's true. He did not get a good grade on his business idea of FedEx. Walt Disney was panned by early production companies, early cartoon companies, early publishing companies. His Mickey Mouse ideas and his cartoon ideas were not well received. He endured. He persevered. Martin Luther King endured so much, persevered. If he lacked any of these things, then the civil rights movement would have been longer in coming. It would have been different. It wouldn't have been as good as it was, but he had that kind of perseverance. And of course, the thing that I write about in the book is exploration. I tell a great story in the book where there was an Arctic explorer, and basically he spent 144 days away from base camp, got into some horrible weather, some horrible conditions, fell into ice chasms or to these deep fissures in the ice, pulled himself back out of them, somehow managed to persevere. And when he got back to base camp, basically sent his fiance a short telegram saying, "Sorry for the delay. I'm okay. We'll see you soon." Very humble, but that's the kind of perseverance and patience that these types of people have. The final one, and organizations have, by the way, sacrifice. Again, not a fun thing to talk about, not something that you're going to hear motivational speakers talk about very much, but think of all the people in your life that sacrificed for you. I think about that quite a bit, that there were people that sacrificed for me, that did so much for me. And every day this happens. People sacrifice so much for each other. Parents sacrifice, first responders sacrifice. It's an amazing thing to see sacrifice. And of course, if you see it here, it's at two levels: personal sacrifice, your time, your wealth, your plans, your talents, your energy, the pride and fame. All of these are sacrificed for the team, and you do it willingly. From the organizational perspective, we talked about this a little bit, and it's so important. Non-performing ideas, technologies, processes have to be sacrificed for the performing ideas. This is very, very tough. The great organizations are able to sacrifice. They're able to collaborate. They're able to endure. They follow the numbers. They have great ambition. All of these things are in place. So to kind of give you an idea of the extraordinary things that can happen when an organization has all of these things together, let's look at the Event Horizon Telescope. Now, I write about this project pretty extensively in the book. It was one that fascinated me because I love astronomy. I had a small telescope as a child. I still have a telescope that I will turn towards the night sky sometimes. I've always been fascinated with the stars. It's amazing to think about the universe around us. Well, the Event Horizon Telescope was able to give us a rendering of something that was in theory, something that was written about, something that Einstein talked about in his theories, and they were able to prove it. They were able to establish that it exists, and not only that, they were able to photograph it. Let's take a look.
The Event Horizon Telescope collaboration is a group of more than 300 scientists
from many different countries, continents, and institutions to make a telescope the size of the Earth.
These are engineers, observers, theoreticians who've come together to answer this question of can we see black holes and what are black holes?
The black hole you can imagine as a kind of sphere with an event horizon, and the event horizon is the outer boundary of the black hole.
Seeing a black hole actually allows us to not only know they exist and not only know an event horizon exists, it also allows us to test some of the very basic predictions of the theory of general relativity of Albert Einstein.
We do this by combining pre-existing telescopes across the Earth, bringing them together in a new way that permits us to effectively make an Earth-sized telescope.
We have to plan for months and months and months in advance, gather our equipment, and then we have this great migration of people to observatories all around the world. We send all of our data together, and only when it's truly combined do we know if it's worked.
I think there's a really exciting future beyond the first time of imaging a black hole. It's actually understanding the physics of black holes and what they do in the universe and how they excite particles and jets and affect their environments. And so there's going to be a lot of work in the future.
So the Event Horizon Telescope has opened this new window on gravity research by focusing our attention on this unique opportunity, this unique environment in which gravity isn't just part of the story, but it is the entire story.
It's really interesting to see the amount of collaboration and also to see in action these aspects of tribal spirit. So in wrapping up and thinking about the most innovative organizations in the world, the most innovative initiatives that have taken place through history, what we can do as leaders is think about tribal spirit across these 7 dimensions: ambition, emergent structure, trust, roles and responsibilities, perseverance, sacrifice, emergent structure, and navigation. And what we can do is think of them as glasses of water. And we can ask ourselves, in our organization or in the project that we're managing, how full or how empty are these glasses? We can even extract that out to projects that you've seen fail, projects that were just okay, projects that were extraordinary, and ask yourself, how full or how empty were these glasses in that project? One of the exercises that I really enjoy doing is having students or executives think about a project that was just okay. It was okay. And have them remember what those glasses might have been like. And what you'll see is that the ambition glass maybe was only 1/3 full, or maybe 1/5 full. Roles and responsibilities were empty. Nobody really knew what their role was on the project. Trust was empty. Perseverance was half full. Emergent structure might have been empty. Navigation might have been half empty. But you can start to see how the outcome of the project matches the tribal spirit that was within the project. And in contrast, I'll ask them to think about a project that was extraordinary, a project where something was expected, but something extraordinary occurred, a project where maybe the most talented people weren't part of the project, but it became something spectacular. And it's funny thinking about that. In Apple, the iPod project was really characterized as a secondary project to iMac, and that the talent level on that project was not necessarily extraordinary, but the outcome was extraordinary because the tribal spirit of that team was completely full in terms of these glasses. Everything was full. Well, when I ask these executives to think about those great projects, it's no surprise that they'll come back and say all these glasses were full. And what it means is there was a great predisposition to do something extraordinary. Think about it in terms of something that you were a part of at some point in your life, some project. Perhaps it was a football game that you never thought you would win, but somehow your team wins. Maybe it was field hockey. Maybe it was soccer. Maybe it was just working in a team on a project for an organization, and somehow the magic happens. And think back, how full were these classes? And you can actually probably see that there was a lot of tribal spirit. Well, going forward, think about that from the standpoint of the next project you manage. How full or how empty are these classes? It really gives you some insight into how organizations accomplish incredible things. Well, that's the time we have for this broadcast. This has been great. This is sort of my life in research, to take a look at organizations and to try to understand what that magic spark is. What is that esprit de corps? What is that thing that caused magic to happen? It's tribal and it's definable. It's something we can understand. It's something we can apply to ourselves, to be a little bit more ambitious, to think about our emergent structure, how we interact with people around us, how we use data, our willingness to sacrifice, our ability to endure when things get tough, and our ability to trust sometimes when it's very difficult to trust. These are all the things we can apply to ourselves, and we can think about them in the organizations that we work in. And perhaps someday we can accomplish the incredible. Take care, stay on the solution side of the equation, and I'll see you soon.